And we're going to continue with the Mystery of Marie Rogêt. So, again, old story, 1840s. Here's what we know so far. Marie Rogêt was murdered. Her body was found in the River Seine after she had been gone for 2 days. She'd been missing previously. She worked as a perfumer, and after 4 weeks and a huge reward, no information was turned up. C. Augustin Dupin was contacted. He is the detective from The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which I've already read you. And the reason that nobody has came forth with information about the crime, now we think, is because some misinformation had been spread that the body was not actually Marie Rogêt. And the author, Edgar Allan Poe, who is awesome as always, is going to explain to us what newspaper articles led people to think that the Marie Rogêt body was a fake. We'll pick up there. Mademoiselle Rogêt left her mother's house on Sunday morning, June the 22nd, 18, with the ostensible purpose of going to see her aunt or some other connection in the Rue des Drômes. From that hour, nobody is proved to have seen her. There is no trace or tidings of her at all. There has no person whatever come forward so far who saw her at all on that day after she left her mother's door. Now, though we have no evidence that Marie Rogêt was in the land of the living after 9 o'clock on Sunday, June the 22nd, we have proof that up to that hour she was alive. On Wednesday noon at 12, a female body was discovered afloat on the shore of the Barre des Roues. This was, even if we presume that Marie Rogêt was thrown into the river within 3 hours after she left her mother's house, only 3 days from the time she left her home. 3 days to an hour. But it is folly to suppose that the murder, if the murder was committed on her body, could have been consummated soon enough to have enabled her murderers to throw the body into the river before midnight. Those who are guilty of such horrid crimes choose darkness rather than light. Thus, we see that if the body found in the river was that of Marie Rogêt, it could only have been in the water 2.5 days, or 3 at the outside. All experience has shown that drowned bodies, or bodies thrown into the water immediately after death by violence, require from 6 to 10 days for sufficient decomposition to take place to bring them to the top of the water, even where a cannon is fired over a corpse, it rises before at least 5 or 6 days immersion. It sinks again if let alone. Now we ask, what was there in this case to cause a departure from the ordinary course of nature? If the body had been kept in its malign state on shore until Tuesday night, some trace would be found on shore of the murderers. It is a doubtful point also whether the body would be so soon afloat, even were it thrown in after having been dead 2 days. And furthermore, it is exceedingly improbable that any villains who had committed such a murder, as is here supposed, would have thrown the body in without weight to sink it, when such a precaution could so easily have been taken. The editor here proceeds to argue that the body must have been in the water not 3 days merely, but at least 5 times 3 days, because it was so far decomposed that Bouvets had a great difficulty in recognizing it. This latter point, however, was fully disproved. I continue the translation. What then are the facts on which M. Bouvets says that he has no doubt the body was that of Marie Rogêt? He ripped up the gown sleeve, and says he found marks which satisfied him of the identity. The public generally supposed those marks to have consisted of some description of scars. He rubbed the arm and found hair upon it, something as indefinite, we think, as can be readily imagined, as little conclusive as finding an arm in the sleeve. M. Bouvet did not return that night, but sent word to Madame Rogêt at 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening that an investigation was still in progress respecting her daughter. If we allow that Madame Rogêt, from her age and grief, could not go over which is allowing a great deal. There certainly must have been someone who would have thought it worthwhile to go over and attend the investigation if they thought the body was that of Marie. Nobody went over. There was nothing said or heard about the matter in Rue Pavie Saint Andre that reached even the occupants of the same building. M. St. Eustace, the lover and intended husband of Marie, who boarded in her mother's house, deposes that he did not hear of the discovery of the body of his intended until the next morning, when M. Bouvet came to his chambers and told him of it. For an item of news like this, it strikes us as very coolly received. In this way, the journal endeavored to create the impression of an apathy on the part of the relatives of Marie, inconsistent with the supposition that those relatives believed the corpse to be hers. Its insinuations amount to this, that Marie, with the connivance of her friends, had absented herself from the city for reasons involving a charge against her chastity, and that these friends, upon the discovery of a corpse in the Seine, somewhat resembling that of the girl, had availed themselves of the opportunity to impress the public with the belief of her death. But L'Étoile was again over-hasty. It was distinctly proved that no apathy such as was imagined existed, that the old lady was exceedingly feeble and so agitated as to be unable to attend to any duty, that St. Eustace, so far from receiving the news coolly, was distracted with grief and bore himself so frantically that M. Bouvet prevailed upon a friend and relative to take charge of him and prevent his attending the examination at the disinterment. Moreover, although it was stated by L'Étoile that the corpse was reinterred at the public expense, that an advantageous offer of private sepulchre was absolutely declined by the family, and that no member of the family attended the ceremonial, although, I say, all this was asserted by L'Étoile in furtherance of the impression it designed to convey, yet all this was satisfactorily disproved. In a subsequent number of the paper, an attempt was made to throw suspicion upon Bouvet himself. The editor says, "Now then, a change comes over the matter. We are told that on one occasion, while Madame B. was at Madame Rogêt's house, M. Bouvet, who was going out, told her that a Grenadine was expected there, and that she, Madame B., must not say anything to the gendarme until he returned, but let the matter be for him in the present posture of affairs. M. Bouvet appears to have the whole matter locked up in his head. A single step cannot be taken without M. Bouvet, for, go which way you will, or run against him. For some reason, he determined that nobody shall have anything to do with the proceedings but himself, and he has elbowed the male relatives out of the way according to their representations, in a very singular manner. He seems to have been very much averse to permitting the relatives to see the body." By the following fact, some color was given to the suspicion thus thrown upon Bouvet. A visitor at his office a few days prior to the girl's disappearance, and during the absence of its occupant, had observed a rose in the keyhole of the door, and the name Marie inscribed upon a slate which hung near at hand. The general impression, so far as we were enabled to glean it from the newspapers, seemed to be that Marie had been the victim of a gang of desperadoes, that by these she had been borne across the river, maltreated and murdered. Le Commercial, however, a print of extensive influence, was earnest in combating this popular idea. I quote a passage from 2 of its columns. "We are persuaded that pursuit has hitherto been on a false scent so far as it has been directed to the Barrière des Rues. It is impossible that a person so well known to thousands as this young woman was, should have passed 3 blocks without someone having seen her, and anyone who saw her would have remembered it, for she interested all who knew her. It was when the streets were full of people. When she went out, it was impossible that she could have gone to the Barrière des Roues or the Rue des Dromes without being recognized by a dozen persons, yet no one has come forward who saw her outside of her mother's door. And there is no evidence except the testimony concerning her expressed intentions that she did go out at all. Her gown was torn, bound round her, and tied, and by that the body was carried as a bundle. If the murder had been committed at the Barrière des Roues, there would have been no necessity for any such arrangement. In fact, or the fact, that the body was found floating near the Barrière is no proof as to where it was thrown into the water. A piece of one of the unfortunate girl's petticoats, 2 feet long and 1 foot wide, was torn out and tied under her chin, around the back of her head, probably to prevent screams. This was done by fellows who had no pocket handkerchiefs. A day or two before the prefect called upon us, however, some important information reached the police, which seemed to overthrow at least the chief portion of Le Commercial's argument. 2 small boys, sons of Madame Dulac, were roaming among the woods near the Barrière du Roule, chanced to penetrate a close thicket within which were 3 or 4 large stones, forming a kind of seat, with a back and footstool. On the upper stone lay a white petticoat, on the second a silk scarf. A parasol, gloves, and a pocket handkerchief were also found. The handkerchief bore the name Marie Rogêt. Fragments of dress were discovered on the brambles around. The earth was trampled, the bushes were broken, and there was every evidence of a struggle. Between the thicket and the river, the fences were found shaken down, and the ground bore evidence of some heavy burthen having been dragged along it. A weekly paper, Le Soleil, had the following comments, which merely echoed the sentiment of the whole Parisian press. The things had all evidently been there at least 3 or 4 weeks. They were all mildewed down hard with the action of the rain, and stuck together from mildew. The grass had grown around and over some of them. The silk on the parasol was strong, but the threads of it were run together within. The upper part, where it had been doubled and folded, was all mildewed and rotten, and tore on its being opened. The pieces of her frock, torn out by the bushes, were about 3 inches wide and 6 inches long. One part was the hem of the frock, and it had been mended. The other piece was part of the skirt, not the hem. They looked like strips torn off, and were on the thorn bush about a foot from the ground. There can be no doubt, therefore, that the spot of this appalling outrage has been discovered. And we will pause there.